Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And today, Stacy Lyn Harris tells her story. I dig doing this because I love chatting with folks who are completely different from me. Stacy Lyn is a cookbook author, a Southern lifestyle guru. She's homeschooled 7 kids, and she's married to a dentist. I've done none of that, and I love it. All right, joining me on the podcast is Stacy Lyn Harris. Stacy Lyn, welcome.
I am so excited to be here. This is going to be so much fun.
I hope so. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on me at the jump here, Stacy Lyn, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. So full disclosure, I'm a lifelong New Yorker. You might have gotten from my vibe, but I relocated to Charleston, South Carolina 4 years ago. And although I want to preface, so 4 years ago was the pandemic. I moved down before the pandemic. So I was doing it before it was cool, Stacy Lyn.
Yeah, there you go.
But one of the things that I noticed when I came down here is, especially in Charleston, I'm not sure if it's like that in Bama, but in Charleston, no one's actually from here. Like, they came here for school and stayed, or they came for a man or woman and stayed. So what is it about the South that sucks people in and they can never leave?
I don't know. I really believe though it's it's kind of inborn in everyone to be hospitable and kind, and to whether they put others before themselves, really maybe not, but they at least act like it. And so I
Right.
think people enjoy that. Although I will say I have visited New York on several occasions, and sometimes I feel like the New Yorkers are a little bit more friendly than they are here. So it kind of it sort of depends on where you are. Like, are you in a rural area in the middle of the city, or whatever? It kind of depends. But I think it has to do with the hospitality and people bringing food. I think the food is big because South Carolina, the food is amazing. You're right there next to the coast. I mean, it's just great. And
Yeah.
how can you get any better? Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say about New Yorkers being nice, just so you know, we kind of overcompensate because we do have this sort of
Yeah.
cliched view of, well, they're all dicks up there. And then, so now, when anyone like out of towners go up there, I mean, you're going to randomly run into a grouchy New Yorker, but I think we all try to be better at
Yeah.
welcoming all the tourists that come into town.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Stacey Lyn, you have a very, I want to say odd background, because I don't know. I've spoken to a lot of people that have written cookbooks. Some of the biggest and best that you could think of. You're the only one who's written a cookbook that also passed the bar exam. How
Yeah.
how
Yes.
did that happen?
Well, I grew up in like a career-oriented home, and pretty much tried to be the best at everything that I tried to do. And my mom wanted me to be a business major, graduated. But I said, well, I think I'm just going to go and go to law school. And in ninth grade really is kind of an interesting thing. They picked several people to go and see a court case, and it was at the military base, which was kind of unusual. Well, anyway, at that point, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And I had planned that my entire life, and went to law school, passed the bar exam. Then my husband passed his test to go to dental school. So we moved within that year, and I already had a baby. I had a baby the last year I was in law school, which was insane. But anyway, passed the bar exam, and I practiced a little bit. But once I had my second baby, I was like, you know what? And I was so totally in love with my child, and I did not like leaving him. And then I had another one, and I'm like, it's more affordable really for me just to stay here and to do what I'm doing. And as we started living at home together, and I was looking for activities for us to do, we would start gardening. We went hiking and enjoying the outdoors. My husband was a big hunter, and it just happened that one day, we had talked about writing a book forever. So I wrote my very first book, and it was on wild game of all things. And because I was like, I need pictures. I'm a very visual person. I like beauty. I want to see pictures. So I was like, I'm going to write a wild game book that I show pictures with every recipe. So then that just spurred on to other things, sustainable living. And then, I'm ingrained so much in this Southern lifestyle that I'm like, it only made sense for me to write a Southern cookbook that has all of those elements in it. So that is how this book was born. And that's how I got to where I'm at. And I still love the law. One of my sons just ran for US Senate, US Congress. And I mean, I'm still involved in all that. We have 7 children. I don't know if you know that or not, but
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So I just fell in love with one baby and we just kept having more.
Yeah,
So it was,
it sounds like you enjoyed the process of that. One of the things that also you talk about is homeschooling. You've homeschooled
I did.
all of your children, and
Yeah.
here's the thing. So I don't have kids, and I always felt people that homeschooled did it for multiple reasons. But one of the things I always thought was a negative was you take them out of the element of like the shit we put up with when we go to school, the bullies, the jerks, having people talk behind their back, all the,
Yeah.
teachers of varying qualities. And sometimes I feel like that helps grow people, like being able to experience hardships early in their early ages. Why do you think it was important for you to do that, especially for the amount of like if you had a couple kids, you'd be like, oh, it's easy, but 7, that's a lot,
Yeah.
Stacy Lyn. So why was it so important to homeschool?
Well, for me, I felt like, well, there's so many reasons that it's crazy, but for me, I felt like you're given, this is me and not the whole rest of the world or whoever. I'm not, I'm good with school too. But and I think there's, like you're saying, there's drawbacks to homeschooling and there's drawbacks to going to school. But for me, I wanted the best hours of the day to be with my children. And for me, the best hours of the day are, from 7:30 in the morning until or really 10 to 3. Those are my best hours. I wanted to give my best to my children. I wanted to see them at their best. And I felt like I could train and teach them better if they were with me, during the day, and I would have better conversations with them. They would be better equipped for life. And I know I can see what you're saying as far as dealing with bullies, dealing with all of the things that we have to deal with in life. But when children are children, I don't think they're as equipped as when they're adults. And I didn't shield them from the world. So I think that they did get that. They did know about that. They did see that, but it didn't necessarily happen to them when they're not equipped for it. I think both methods would work. I mean, you're going to learn it one way or another.
Yeah.
But they seem to have really done good. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but to me, being with my children was super important to me. So
And how good was it that you had 7? Because I can imagine by the 7th one, you must have been like a kick-ass home instructor or whatever function you were doing it at home. But like you must have gotten really good at it.
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but because all kids are so different. That was the other thing. As I homeschooled, I was realizing, oh, well, that curriculum is not going to work for this child. And I was able to shift and manage, what this one was doing. This one could take a break in this subject because, obviously they're blocked with it. Let's go and do like a unit study on, some president or whatever, and do writing and you could still do math and science with that because of the things going on around that time with that particular president. So anyway, it's really creative. It's really fun. And I'll say I homeschool this last one, which I'm still homeschooling one, quite different than I did the beginning ones. Not because I think I did something wrong necessarily. It's just things have changed. Life has changed. And then the kids, like when I had older kids and younger kids, the activities changed, everything changed. And with every new addition, things were totally different. So, and they have different things that they like. Mine now that I'm homeschooling, she's all into music. So, and I only have one other one that's into music. So it's really interesting to see the different personalities of these human beings that came out of the same 2 people. It's amazing.
That is so cool. All right, thanks for indulging me on this. I have one more thing about this because you mentioned that your kids are doing very well, but I'm curious about, and maybe I don't know if you could speak to this, but that transition from homeschool to then maybe going
Yeah,
to university or
it was a
higher
big
education.
transition.
What
I
was
w-
that like for them?
it was I will say that it was probably a bigger, not probably, it was a much larger transition than from somebody going from traditional high school to college. So it took them 1 semester. I mean, they were able to get in there. And, my oldest son's a dentist, and when he first went, I remember him telling one of my other kids, yeah, I made a D on my first test. And that, was shocking. But a lot of them, they had to get accustomed to it. But after that first semester, they were good to go. And their relationships have been great. Friendships have been great. I mean, everything has kind of fallen into place. But every time I have a new one go, I'm like, oh gosh, I hope this works. So, there was a really big experiment.
Oh,
But, yeah.
that's so cool. That's so great. And all right, last thing on this. So I mentioned the pandemic before, and obviously during the pandemic, a lot of people were forced to homeschool. Were
Yeah.
you sort of at home kicking back like, I got this on lock? All these mothers and fathers are like pulling their hair, trying to figure out how to do this. How were you able to maybe like help the people in your community that had to deal with this for the first time? Because you're obviously a pro at it, but for most, it's not easy, especially when you're doing it in such a turbulent time. So what was it like seeing it from your perspective?
I wanted to help people as much as I could through this process. So I was getting calls and I was getting texts and different things from people around me. And my thought on that, now the difference between homeschooling and traditional education, everybody has to be on the same page in traditional education. So they had to get their kids ready for starting back school when it did start. So there was more pressure on them than I had, because I knew that I was in it for the long haul, and they don't necessarily have to keep up with the school, or we could do a different thing than the school. We could go ahead, we could go behind. I mean, just kind of at our own pace. So that part was kind of hard for me to help other people with, but because I don't really feel like school needs to look like traditional education. The reason that it looks like that, with everybody sitting down for, an hour listening to a lecture, is because that's the only way that you can teach a number of students, 30 to 40 kids. You have to have it that way. And that's not necessarily the way we do it. I have my kids do a whole lot of research and different things. So that was kind of my advice to them, is if they're having to write research, if they're having to learn about a particular thing, have them learn things about that subject that touches their soul. Like for me, it would have been fashion or something like that in 1809. What did that look like? And then that would relate back to everything else. The house, the farm, how did it look? How did this happen? But it would start with, what clothes did they wear? So I was like, find something that they really wanted to look at, and then, back out from that and try to figure out a way to make it interesting to them. And it made it a little bit easier for people, I think, to homeschool when they thought, okay, this is going to be fun for the kids. So making it fun, is a real big part of it.
Sweet. Well, thank you very much for humoring me. I'm sure you probably didn't expect talking about homeschooling for about 10 minutes.
I didn't, but it was great fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, so on the subject of your cookbook, because that's what you're out there talking about now. The name of it is Love Language of the South: A Celebration of Food, Hospitality, and the Stories of My Southern Home. And I want to kind of dial back to your first one when you talked about wild game. If you go to a bookstore, people still do. If anyone's listening to this, people still do go to a bookstore. There are thousands of cookbooks, and then there are like hundreds and maybe thousands of Southern cookbooks. What was your, when you talk to entrepreneurs, what was your differentiator? What do you feel? What do you think you were bringing to the table that was different, that would cut through the clutter of all of these books, especially that first one? Because now you're probably like, I'm Stacy Lyn Harris, I got this unlocked. But like when you first started doing it, was it like, and I don't like to use the phrase imposter syndrome because they say it's bullshit, but like, did you feel like fear or like, were you worried that, will anyone want to read what I have to say about cooking?
Well, the first cookbook, I was so such a newbie that I didn't know anything. So I had no fear whatsoever, because I didn't know how competitive it was. And what I did, this is kind of crazy. I was like, okay, how many hunters are in the world? I researched how many hunters. And I'm thinking, well, if I get 1% of those people to buy my book, I've got it made. And so that's all I went with. I didn't look at my competition. I did not figure out what I should name it. I just did it. And I didn't have a website. Y'all, you would not believe this. This is terrible. I didn't even know, I don't even think I had an email address of my own. I didn't need one. I just I did not know. So I learned from scratch how to do this, and it was a real process. But but I knew enough. I ran for a lot of like student government, and and president of this and that. So I kind of know how to market me. So, I've been doing it since ninth grade. So I was like, okay, this will, all I got to do is call these people up and say, hey, can I write this for your magazine? And so I did that with all of, the outdoors magazines and stuff. And then one guy took note of it, and his name was Alan Clemens. He took note of it and wrote a newspaper article on Christmas morning about my book. And it put me on the map. And a bigger publisher, came to me and asked me to write a sustainable living cookbook. And then they did a DVD, and it just kind of blossomed from there. And now with this Love Language of the South, I differentiate my Southern book, and there are a lot out there, and the competition is huge. Although I believe that if you like Southern cookbooks, that you're not just going to buy one. So I don't know that the competition is a problem, because if you have a good enough book, then why not buy, I know it's going to be bought by people who buy Southern cookbooks, or, really any cookbook. But anyway, with my Southern cookbook, it's different in the sense that I try to help people get food on the table, or, at a family reunion in the yard, whatever the case may be, to be hospitable, meaning to care about other people. And it's not about making it perfect in my book, using so many ingredients. It's not about anything over the top. It's about the people. And that's, although, I mean, of course, it's about great recipes, and all of these recipes are tried and true. They are, from most of them from my grandmother's kitchen. So they're old Southern recipes. I've got like cakes galore, Lane cake, hummingbird cake. I don't even know if people have heard of that. And Lane cake's an Alabama cake. I've got coconut cake, pies, you name it. If it is Southern, it's probably in the book, in my favorite recipes. But it's truly grounded in the memories you're making with people, the people involved in it, and truly food is a memory maker. So whatever you're doing, I have that recurring theme through the book: make memories, make food attach to situations, so that those memories will be like branded in people's minds, and they'll think of you, they'll think of each other, they'll think of good times. Leave your baggage at the door is one of the things that I say, and come in and let's relax together and have a conversation. And so I think that's what makes it a little bit different.
That's awesome. I love that. It's funny. You were talking about food that brings back memories. I was just thinking this, and I'm not sure why, but years and years ago, I was with my sister's family. We were in like a ski house in Pennsylvania, and my brother-in-law decided to make stuffed mushrooms. And stuffed mushrooms are basically like a wad of bread stuffed into a mushroom. So I'm sure there's all different kinds of it. So I ate like 5 or 6 of them. And Stacy Lyn, it's one of the few moments I could count on my hand where I was almost deathly ill from eating a food. So to this day, it's like
there.
Yeah. So 20 years later, I still like stuffed mushrooms. No, thank you very much. So is there a food, because you as someone who writes cookbooks, I'm sure it's a lot of experimenting. Going back to talking about your research brain, were there times where you were coming together with a lot of these recipes, whether they're not the classical ones, but when you're trying to reinvent something, where you're like, oh my God, I could have poisoned myself with what I was doing there, because I can imagine the trial and error involved.
There's a lot of trial and error, especially with the wild game. And no, I didn't think about that, but because I pretty much know things that can be rare, things that aren't, make sure that it isn't old, that kind of stuff. But the trial and error, I'll tell you, I had my kids, this was interesting. I had my kids make all the recipes. I would write them. I would, test them. I would figure out what I liked and what I didn't like. I would then have them make the recipe to make sure that they could do the recipe, like that my 14-year-old could read and do the recipe. And so then I knew it was a good recipe if it turned out, because I know that, that everything's in it, that everything's going good, that I gave good instructions. But the pound cake recipe, I was looking for a particular pound cake. This is my memory attached to this pound cake, where a lady came over. This is when I had 3 young children and we had moved into our house. We were new to the neighborhood. She brought a pound cake to the door in a bread pan. And so it's shaped in the form of a bread pan, not your, regular, is another dish that you would use for pound cakes a lot of time. And I wanted to make that particular one. I could not find this lady for the life of me. I looked up and down that neighborhood for where this lady lived. I wanted to give her a thank you note. I wanted to give the recipe. I couldn't find her. I'm like, is this an angel or something showing up at my door? Anyway, I never found her. So I was determined to find that recipe. And I think I got pretty close to the one in the book, but I think I tested using sour cream, using buttermilk, leaving this out, using cake flour as opposed to regular flour. I did everything. I probably made that thing 40 to 45 times before coming up with it. So there are recipes that are burned in my memory because of the process of me practicing, trying to figure out how to make it the best. I recently, I don't want to keep rambling, but I recently did my fried cornbread recipe like all weekend long because I couldn't find it just didn't taste like my grandmother's. So I called my dad and I said, I was like, Daddy, I cannot, it's not tasting like Granny's. It's good, but it's not tasting like hers. And he goes, well, they changed the packaging and they changed the formula when they changed the packaging of the flour, of the cornmeal. And now he said, you're going to have to use White Lily as opposed to that. And it totally fixed it. So,
Wow.
so it's stuff like that. It's just trial and error. Then there's stories all about, the trial and error. So, anyway, it's a lot of fun.
That's so cool. It's funny. You mentioned earlier, and as part of your brand is sustainability. Now, for folks may say sustainability, man, Stacy Lyn Harris, she all woke. That's what all the New Yorkers talk about. That's what the fancy people down in California think about, sustainability. Yeah. First of all, how did it become a part of you and what you do? And then how do you explain to folks like, yeah, that's not a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing. And, you use what's good, whether other people are doing it that, you're not, on their same like team, so to speak. You don't just not do it. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. So it's, to me, sustainable living is more self-sufficient living. And it's, so we had gardens, like I was telling you before, my children, needed something to do, something to care for, something to tend for. They had a pet. Now they have food that they're going to be able to bring to the table and feel like that they've accomplished something. So as they got older, each one of them had their own duties. We did not necessarily make them do it, because when people make, I think, their kids garden and all, they won't take that with them into the rest of their life. And we wanted this to be something that they would take to the rest of their life, that they would enjoy. And all of them do. All of them have some kind of little garden, or they hunt, or they do something for their own food sources. And it's it brings you a lot of satisfaction, confidence, in a can-do spirit, creativity, because sometimes things do not work in the garden, and you're like, so how can I make this work? So adaptability, flexibility, there's so many lessons to be learned, in living off the land, so to speak.
That's cool. And I want to talk about the gender dynamics here, because my good friends down here in Charleston, one's a good old boy from Virginia, another guy's here from Charleston. They do all the cooking in their family. Like they do the cooking and the baking, they do everything. And I try to think back to when I was a kid. I'm a Gen Xer, growing up in the 80s. The idea of a man in the kitchen was like, what's going on with this person? What's happening there? It's like the man in the kitchen was like the single dad living on his own after his wife kicked him out. Like that was the image of what a man in the kitchen looked like. but it's totally different. And I'm sure you see it on the ground level just because in terms of your fans, I'm sure, I mean, obviously you have women who support you, but I'm sure you have a lot of male fans. So talk to me about how gender dynamics have changed in the kitchen and how you're seeing it with the people you associate with, connect with online and in person at events.
Oh my goodness. A lot of the people that I come in contact with are men because of the outdoor channel. So, I have a show on there, The Sporting Chef, and most of them are men, and most of the people that cook wild game are men. And I will have to say, I really kind of think that men like men teaching them, how to cook. They'll listen to me and they're kind of like, okay, that's a pretty good idea. And, but they want other men showing them how to cook. But my dad cooks. He's the one that cooks in the, his household. My husband cooks, and his brother cooks, is the main cook. My husband cooks probably, I won't say as much as I do, but when we're together, he does. I mean, he takes the responsibility. My one, and a lot of times it's the meat, because I look at that, like last night, my oldest son is married, and she made everything that day. She made homemade bread and all this stuff, but she waited for him to do the trout. So he must have had some sort of plan, that he was going to do for the trout. And my other son, his wife is in the military, and both of them are lawyers. She's in JAG, and he wakes up and cooks her breakfast in the morning, does all eat. So I will say it has really, I think, flipped in that sense. I think I know more men that actually cook than women.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's cool. Like I said, it's totally
Yeah.
normal now, but I'm just thinking back
Yeah.
like 30
Yeah.
years, it was just completely different. And I guess you bring a great point, just the fact that a lot of your fans are in that hunting world and they see you.
Yeah.
So I'm sure what are some of those interactions like, Stacy Lyn, out of curiosity, because you're in this world of hunting, which is like there's machismo to it, but here you come trying to teach these guys, these macho guys who are out there hunting, how to cook. What's that connection like? Well, maybe random encounters on the street. Like, what is it? Tell me about that. Tell me how you relate to the folks that read your books, watch your TV shows, follow you online.
Well, a lot of women really appreciate um, the fact that I'm doing the wild game or whatever, and they're interested in that. Or people will see me like, it's rare in my own town. A lot of times, if I go out of town, I'll see people that know who I am a little bit, or they look at me kind of funny, and then they, But I get that here sometimes at the grocery store, and they'll be like, I've seen you before. I go, oh yeah. I don't, I just kind of, yeah, I have that kind of face, I guess. But then they'll go, oh, I think I remember seeing you on, on TV. Are you on TV? And, we start talking, and then they really get into what I'm cooking and all that kind of stuff. But people are really supportive unless they're vegetarians. And so, I'll get a little backlash with the vegetarians because of the fact that we go hunt for our food, that we harvest our own food. The thing that in that situation, the things that people don't know is how much we are caring for the animals on our property. We're feeding them really good food. We're planting green fields for them. We're planting corn fields for them. Yes, it is to grow them to harvest, but it's also for their benefit. It's to keep them healthy. And we're also huge conservation. We're huge into that. And the only way to do that is through control, knowing how many you have, what's going on, what diseases are out there. And we're pretty much the first people to see that. And I didn't mean to go into that, but it kind of goes hand in hand. And so, these conversations do come up with people. And it's interesting what people will say over the internet that they might not say in real life, which I'm sure that you deal with that and encounter that from time to time. So
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned earlier that you didn't even have an email when you wrote your first book, which is it's hysterical. But now, Stacy Lyn, you're very popular online. Your social media channels have thousands and thousands of followers. How does that help? Is it almost like a distraction to your life nowadays because it's so it's really just it's like direct to consumer brands. It's like you are your own direct to consumer brand. You're using social media with it. How do you play with that balance? Like you mentioned, you probably get folks that are vegan or vegetarian that may not like what you do. How do you parse out what you listen to, what you ignore? Because I can only imagine, just because it's funny, I didn't even think about the vegetarian or the animal rights folks when we were discussing, and then as soon as you went there, I'm like, oh shit, I can only imagine what she's seeing on her feed. So what has that been like?
Oh gosh. Well, when I first started, and you would think going to law school and, and all, you wouldn't be a very sensitive person. But when I first started this, I was like, oh my gosh, it was very upsetting. And I would like formulate a thought and go, yeah, I really shouldn't write that. Or it was very awful. Now I just go through there and I don't, it doesn't really bother me. If it's really offensive, I'll just hide the comment just because I don't want to get into a conversation about it. I'm not going to change their opinion. I don't even know who has time to go in there and, yell at me or whatever, so to speak. And so I'm not as bothered by it unless it's something, about my family, which is very, very rare. I don't get that a whole lot. So I've been able to kind of handle that part of it better. I do enjoy getting to know the people on my page, the people that are liking it, that, get notifications when I go live. It's like I formed a relationship, and I know it's not a like real relationship, but I have made some really great friendships out of these people. I have a really good friend that lives in Texas, and I feel like she's like my sister. It's just really amazing. Wow. The people that you do come across. And so I try to keep an open mind to that, but then I also know, there's also stalkery types and, people out there. So, but it's been good. It's been good. I have a hard time keeping up with, okay, I need to post 3 to 5 times on Instagram and I need to do this and I need to do that. That part of it sucks the creativity out of my brain. And I am always trying to come up with a new solution to that dilemma. And if I come up with it, I'll tell you, and we can have a conversation about that, because people will probably want to know. And
it circles back to what you were talking about earlier with your kids. When you're forcing them to do something, it won't click. But here you are forcing yourself to, like, oh God, I got to do 3 stories today. And that really just takes away all the enjoyment. And it's so funny you talk about like negative comments. And I feel like these negative comments online screw it up for everybody else, because I feel bad for like the fans that want to connect with you. Yeah. Instead of you being able to just be like, oh, that's cool, you've got to go through the filth. Like I remember one time when the Kardashians had blown up online and like Kim had posted some sort of random thing. And I was like, oh, let me just see what the comments are. And she's got like a gazillion. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, how do they even know what their fans say? Because they've got to go through all. I mean, obviously you're not at that. You don't have to deal with that to that extent. But just the idea of making it harder for like the true fans to connect and comment, as opposed to then doing like what you probably have to do is like, I'm not even going to bother reading it today, or I'm not even going to like get engaged, which kind of sucks because it takes away the social aspect of a social network,
Yes, it does. But they could not create what they create if they're on that social media all the time. Although you have to post to keep up with, the logarithm and all of that. It's disaster. They probably have just somebody running it and going in and checking it, and and I've had that before. I've had a social media person that would go in, they wouldn't necessarily comment, but they would come back to me during the day and say, hey, somebody's asking about this, what do you want me to say? That kind of stuff. So if it's that important, they probably are answering back, but for most of it, they're probably not, interacting. Yeah. That would be my thought. Just because you can't create products and do big things if you don't put a halt on that to some degree, because it could take up all day. It's unbelievable.
Lastly, I want to ask about dentistry, because you said your husband's a dentist, you got a kid that's a dentist, maybe another one of them come down the line, maybe a dentist. And man, there's something about dentists that I can't even imagine what it's like to live with one, because It
They're
is.
different.
I think it's the one thing that we all do regularly that we all do. We don't mind doing, but we dread that the like the dentist is like our new mother-in-law or new parent, where like you walk in and you're like expecting them to like give you a lot of shit. So what is that dynamic like at
Oh,
home?
that's so
Because
funny.
we all want the dentist, we all need the dentist, but we don't want to hear what the dentist has to say to us. So how does that affect you in your life? Not only having a partner, but also children involved in the industry.
Okay, so my son still has the optimism, because I think this is his third year, practicing and with my husband, and my husband's happy to have him because he takes over a lot of the hiring and firing and all of that. I used to do that. It was awful. And that part of it is really hard on dentists. The biggest thing, and they have, the number one suicide rate. I don't know if you know that or not.
No.
But yeah, and get this, and lawyers are number two, and preachers are number three.
Oh,
But
geez.
and that might have changed since then. So me being a lawyer, and I think a lot of it's personality. So we're pretty intense people. And so he's like a super intense person. He's an artist. All of these things just add up to, introspection. And then he's got people coming in not wanting to see him. So I feel like for me that my job has been to be a cheerleader. So, so yes, it is different. It is different being married to a dentist. And they all have a very peculiar, a great personality, but it's different. And my son will invite all of his friends from dental school to go hunting. Like, so it'll be about, 7 or 8 of them. And the jokes are they're just all different. It is something to watch. Just, just their humor, everything. And my husband's super funny. All these guys are super funny, but it's just a different kind of humor. It's very, very entertaining.
That's
Yeah.
funny. Are there any other possible Harris family people going into dentistry, or do you think that's the only one?
I've got one, that's a lawyer, or the next one, that one just got her MBA. 2 of them are in engineering, so no.
Okay.
And then the other 2, I can't imagine. So I'm saying I'm gonna think I'm gonna think no.
So the faucet's been cut off to the dentistry path from the Harris family,
Yeah,
sounds like.
I
Oh,
think
that's
so.
funny. Well, this has been such a delightful conversation. We've went in all different places. I appreciate you humoring me, going on these random tangents. Thank
Oh,
you so
good
much
work.
for the time. Good luck with the book, and looking forward to see what you next. I'm to be honest with you, full disclosure, I don't even know where the Outdoor Channel is on my cable system, so I'm gonna have to check it out, check out your show, and see if I can learn something, because everyone down here hunts for something. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you can use it for beef. Anything I do for venison, you can use beef. You just can't interchange. You can't use beef for venison because is that right? I don't know. The opposite. You just it's different. It's just the techniques are different. But beef
Okay.
will work with anything. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for the time, Stacy Lyn. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was great fun.
Stacy Lyn's Love Language of the South is available wherever books are sold, and that's today's Good Listen. I'm Joe Pardavila. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, or Instagram at Joe Pardavila, or TikTok at jpardavila. If you want to shoot me a note, you can always email me at joepardavila@protonmail.com, and it would be awesome if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.